Far from what some are describing the second coming of the Cold War, there's Iran. We're going to talk about it. It's time now for part two of The World This Week. And with us, journalist Peter GUMBEL. His latest book, France Has Got Talent. Gianni Carta, Paris correspondent for Brazilian weekly newspaper Carta Capital. Cintia CARDOSO of the Brazilian service of sister station Radio France International. And Franco-Syrian photojournalist Anmar ABD RABBO. We're talking about Iran, where there's still negotiating over the nuclear program with that group of 6 nations that includes both the West and Russia. And the new president now has to fend off hardliners while dealing with the pinch of UN sanctions. This Friday, the government reducing fuel subsidies for motorists. That nearly doubled the price at the pump to 7,000 reals a liter. That's still only 22 cents, but it's tough nonetheless. Gianni Carta, you wrote the Carta Capital's cover story in Iran a few weeks back, just back from there. This move, they were supposed to do this back in 2012, ease the subsidies on fuels for motorists. They're doing it now. Could this really test the popularity of Hassan Rouhani?
Well, I think they're doing it now because Rouhani is really willing to make economic reforms, whereas Ahmadinejad didn't. You know, in fact, if you go to Iran, as I did, I spent 2 weeks there, just got back. Most people say that the crisis, the reason why they're talking to the West is not really because they had no options because, you know, of the sanctions. That had an impact, they admit. But the reason why they're talking to the West is because the last 8 years of Ahmadinejad, in economic terms, was a disaster. So I think Rouhani has the guts to say, look, we have to do this because of the sanctions. It is a real problem. But what I think about this whole process is that there's, despite the fact that it has to go on, just like when Nixon went to China in the 70s, Obama has to go to Iran, has to go towards Iran. We need to talk to them. But there's little optimism for 2 reasons. Well, the Americans do not really accept the 1979 Iranian Revolution. That's the first one. They don't accept that. They don't accept that system. On the other hand, they're skeptical about how far they can go with their reforms, with their nuclear program. And also, they want to include human rights. They want to include other issues in the negotiations. And the Iranians are scared of that.
The Iranians are scared of that. On the issue, so we have the partial lifting of these subsidies, which could dent Rouhani's popularity. But Rouhani himself, just how much of a moderate is he? We've seen this week there were protests over the treatment of political prisoners at Tehran's notorious Evin prison. In that regards, you know, how more moderate is the regime compared to the previous one?
Well, Mousavi was under arrest, is still under arrest since the Green Revolution, Green Movement, because he claimed that he had run those presidential elections and not Ahmadinejad, who served then his second term. So there's still a lot of political prisoners. There's still a lot of problems with human rights. But this is, now we have to turn to realpolitik. We're here to talk about the nuclear negotiations. We're not here to talk about human rights first. This is not what the Iranians want. The Iranians want to first solve the problem of human rights. And they think that they have the right, they believe that they have the right, and they do, I think, to have a peaceful nuclear program with inspectors coming often from the West, and so that's the thing. Now, one thing that I noticed in Iran is that they're suspicious of the West, because, you know, and Jack Straw, the former foreign minister of the UK, was there recently, and when he came back, he said, look, they have reasons to feel anti-American, anti-British, anti-Israel. You know, we supported the Mossadegh coup d'etat in 1953. It was a CIA-backed coup d'etat.
Right, but right now it's about Rouhani, and will he or won't he? Now, maybe I'll put it to you, Anmar ABD RABBO. Will he succeed in winning his battle domestically with hardliners and reaching a deal?
I remember we had the conversation here a few months ago that as long as we have this system with the Murshid, the supreme guide of the revolution,
of course,
who is the real master player, in Iran, the rest is. I don't want to say it's comedy because sometimes it's really tragedy, but the rest is what we call in French figuration. Some people maybe I agree. I agree with Gianni on the economical changes. That's maybe the only margin Rouhani might have. But on the real system, let's say human rights, let's say involvement in Iraq, involvement in Syria, Hezbollah, issues that are important to the whole area. I am not sure Rouhani has the hand. I'm not sure he can change anything, and I'm not sure the Iranian system as it is, the regime, is willing to change any of these issues.
Yeah, he's a moderate surrounded by hardliners, and we don't know how much room he will have. I think he doesn't have much room for belief, for external policy.
He was elected in June last year. He didn't really have much time. His priority is the economy. He released some political prisoners already. He's trying. But the human rights are not his priority. His priority is the economy. And he has been doing something. Inflation is down. Unemployment is down to 13%. The country is not doing as bad as it was before. And he is the man who can make these reforms. But now you're right. I think the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he has the final word. So how far can Rouhani go? That's the question.
The tone has changed too. The rhetoric is softer. It's much less of the sort of the vitriolic anti-Western diatribes that we got used to from Iranian leaders. And we're also seeing with the nuclear agreement, the nuclear interim agreements, at least, the Iranians seem to be sticking to the terms, and so far, so good. So you're right. It's very hard to know what is happening behind the scenes, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in, and clearly Netanyahu is one person who says, this whole thing is a farce. But at the same time, if there is at least a change of tone, that has to be a good sign, you would have thought.
Anmar ABD RABBO, you went to the airport last weekend to welcome home our 4 French colleagues, journalists who'd been held in Syria. We could show perhaps some of the pictures that you yourself snapped. 8 months, close to 9 months. Really.
9 months.
9
close
months
to 10, yes.
of anguish. Talk of a hefty ransom in the follow up to it. It's always the same question: was it worth it to go there for these 4 men?
The question was asked many times in many gatherings when we were supporting and asking for their release, and a lot of colleagues were telling me nobody should go anymore to Syria. And I was very pleased and happy to hear them talking about this once they're back in Paris, and saying, of course, it's our duty to go there. Of course, if you're a journalist today, you cannot say, I'm not covering Syria. Of course, we have to be more careful. We have to not double, not triple, maybe four times check our sources and our people and our fixers, etc. But we have to go. And Nicolas Hénin had this very nice word. He said, we should not double punish the Syrians. First they have the shelling and the battles and everything, and then they have the total blackout of the press. So nobody goes, and then when you receive images, people are doubtful and they say, oh, these are propaganda images from this side or from that side, so we won't trust anything coming from there, and we don't want to send anybody. So at the end, nothing is happening. And you saw it this week, François. This week there is more or less confirmed new chemical attacks in Syria. Did we read it in mass media? Did we see a lot of analysis like we saw in August of last year? No, unfortunately, no.
Of course, the less journalists we have there, the less information, and as you said, the population will be double punished because they'll be even more isolated and they have no voice, no way to express and to show what's going on there. of course, but it's a risk. And,
Now, another part of the story was that there were French speakers among our colleagues' captors. That prompted the government here in France this week to announce measures to thwart all the homegrown jihadists that are popping up. They number more than 700, according to the government. Many underage, some even female. They, in their bedrooms, over the internet, get indoctrinated. They can take off for Turkey on a budget carrier with tourists before heading to the Syrian border. One mother describing the shock and the text messages exchanges that she's had.
He wrote, "I love you, Mum. This is what Allah wants. It's not me who decided. If you see me again, it will be in heaven, God willing. We need to control Facebook across borders, and all these videos of fanatics with their weapons, their beards, their turbans, and all the rest.
We need to control Facebook," she says, and the government's talking about cyber patrollers over the web, talks with internet service providers and with social media on how to control this, hotline numbers where people can blow the whistle. What do you think of those measures unveiled?
Complete non-starter. It just doesn't work. There's what's very interesting about this is not just a French phenomenon. You're also seeing this in Britain. You're seeing this even in Germany. There was a rapper the other day who ended up being killed, who was in Syria. Syria has become a magnet for a particularly disaffected, disenfranchised Muslim young person in Western Europe who
they're not necessarily Muslim, by the way.
Well, some of them are not, and some of, or if they are, they're very not, not religious, not from religious families. What's interesting is it's become, as I say, it's become a magnet for a particular type of person who feels there is an enormous injustice going on here, and that they need to get involved. And we've seen this in the past in other conflicts. We've seen this in the Spanish Civil War, most famously. We've seen this in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Serbia. But what's curious this time is, that it's been infused with this sort of jihadi, very radical spirit, and it's worrying how big is it? I mean, the 400 to 700. That's the Interior Ministry estimate. The British are saying 40 to 50 from Britain. So is it a very, very marginal thing, or is it really as big as people?
The British, who, by the way, on Thursday unveiled a national campaign to stop would-be terrorists, focusing on women, getting them to encourage their male relatives from going. Do you think that's more effective than the French measures announced?
Well, we now see that there's some of the women are going too, so it's complicated. I think the real issue is, can you figure out where this is coming from, what's the source, and can you try and deal with it locally? I think trying to stop Facebook, trying to stop Twitter or the social media is not the way to do it. You've got to find the messenger. You've got to find the propagandists who are bringing the people in.
What is terrible in UK, and it's not yet the case in France, but might be happening soon also, is that there's a total mixture of people who are so-called jihadists who go to fight, but also people who go, let's say, to do social work or to do humanitarian work or to serve as an ambulance drivers or things like that, are also being kept in the same bag, let's say, of people going to Syria, and so people who could be dangerous when they come back. And this is, I think, this is very dangerous also to mix everybody together. And it's terrible. I mean, for me, as coming from Syrian origin, it's terrible to see the whole Syrian issue dealt with through the jihadists, the 700 French jihadists or the 100 UK jihadists travel. That's all we know now about Syria. That's all we discuss.
It's the only part of the story that's being covered.
It's the only part of the story. And it's terrible because, as we used to say, there are 130 or 140,000 people killed. There are shellings every day. There is, it's hell. And we are looking at the really little part of the whole story.
All right. In less than 2 months, the whole world will be watching Brazil, promised land of the beautiful game, host of the 2014 Football World Cup. But this emerging giant still has plenty of growing pains. The latest example, fresh clashes with police this week in the Pavãozinho slum right near Rio's Copacabana beach after the death of a 26-year-old male dancer.
There is a feeling of injustice. What they did to my son is inconceivable. He wasn't a criminal, he was a hard worker. He was working, he had employment. The police go around harassing people, humiliating others. They don't ask for ID, they just go around killing like we're dogs.
Cintia Cardoso, this story has really resonated in Brazil. This young man was something of a role model in that slum.
Exactly. He was especially known because he dances in a TV show that's quite popular, a TV show on Sunday. And he was seen as a role model for the community. Someone who struggles but succeeded, goes to TV, which in Brazil it's a huge, huge deal to go to TV Globo. It's the main Brazilian broadcast. So of course, it's very shocking because according to the police or according to the people who live in this favela, Pavãozinho, he was mistaken by a drug dealer. So the police, as his brutal method, allegedly attacked him, thinking that he was a drug dealer. He was dead. And according to his mom and to his father as well, if he was not known or a minor celebrity, he'd be just gone and disappeared as so many others, unfortunately, in Brazilian slums.
How does this bode for the World Cup?
Well, difficult to say actually, because we see that the police, it's very, not say stressed, but they have to perform to show that they're doing a good job before the World Cup. So, of course, the violence that's already common in slums and so on, they might have a notch more because so much attention focused on Brazil. And this attention, of course, it's double jeopardy for the Brazilian police because, of course, now they're under the spotlight as well. And all these kind of crimes now, as soon as something like this will happen, of course, they'll be on headlines.
Gianni Carta, when you think back to when Brazil was awarded the World Cup and the Olympics in 2016, and you look at where the country is now, is it where you thought it would be?
In terms of the World Cup?
In terms of how Brazil is doing?
I think the World Cup cannot really change the situation in the country. So, you know, football was always used by the military before from 1964 to 1985 to really get Brazilians together and everybody, it's a happy nation. You know, it's opium of the masses. Let's quote the Marxists. But it is. Brazilians, when you talk about football, they're very happy. But then last year, we saw the bus fare manifestations that started because millions of dollars were being spent on stadiums. There were, in the beginning, 8 stadiums. Now there are 12. At least 2 of them are not going to be used afterwards. In Amazonas, in the north. In Brasilia, the capital. They're not going to be used. There's little domestic support, and FIFA chose 3 main celebrity footballers. One is Pelé, obviously. The other one is Romario, and the other one is Ronaldo, and then Romario. Yeah. Well, the first 2 are diplomats. I mean, they're geniuses, but they're diplomats. They conform with the system and they say nothing.
I was going to say, Romario has been quite outspoken.
Romario is outspoken, and I'm really proud of him because he says, you know, Joseph Blatter is running this country, the president of FIFA. And he's right, because Joseph Blatter said, well, you know, I've never seen a country that is so slow in organizing the World Cup. You know, they're so behind schedule, and, you know. And he says things. I mean, this is a very positive thing. So I'm not very. Of course, I like soccer. You know, I'm looking forward to it. Not supporting any particular team, but I love soccer. But I don't really understand. I understand why these people are revolting. And this is just to finish. This is the first time, if you look at the history of Brazil, the Brazilians are really taking it to the streets to oppose the government, which, by the way, is not a bad government. Dilma Rousseff is a former woman who was in jail during the dictatorship. But anyway, it's a positive thing. For the first time, people are rebelling against something. They're saying, Romario said, just to finish, I'm sorry, I digress. But Romario said, we have first-class hospitals. We have first-class stadiums, but we don't have first-class hospitals, and we don't have first-class schools. which is what Brazilians need. So
infrastructure not following the
infrastructure
rapid
not
growth,
following.
the rapid growth that
it is
we've seen.
very, very positive what Romar is doing.
Time now for the book segment of the show. And the big story in the U.S. is a 685-page tome that's shot to #1 on Amazon.com's bestseller list, Capital in the 21st Century, by a French left-wing economist, Thomas Piketty. New York Magazine writes, 180 years after Alexis de Tocqueville came back to France with the news that he'd found true égalité, equality in America, his countryman has arrived on our shores to deliver the opposite news.
So, it's great to have entrepreneurs, it's great to have a new wealth being formed, but this has to be compatible with the size of the world economy. If the top of the distribution is rising 3 or 4 times faster than the world economy, if you have that during the next 50 years, basically all the wealth will belong to a very small international elite. And basically there will be no wealth middle class anymore. And there will be a level of inequality which is simply not compatible with our democratic and meritocratic values.
This is more than just talking about the 99%.
Right. Well, what he's done brilliantly is he's put together statistics in a way that nobody has done until now, which show that essentially we have been living for the last 20, 30 years in a revival of the 19th century, where it was all about if you had wealth, you got richer, and if you didn't have wealth, it didn't matter how much you worked, you would never catch up. And what he's managed to show with very carefully compiled statistics is that there was a period after the Second World War when the people who had wealth became a less important part of the overall economy, and so work paid. But that since
meritocracy, as he said,
paid. But since the 80s, it's just been the opposite, and it's particularly the case in the United States, where inequality is getting more and more acute, where real wages for normal people have stagnated since the 1970s, whereas for the 1% they've risen by 350%, and for the 0.1% they've risen by double that. So the point he's making is that we are heading towards a system like in the 19th century where you had these family dynasties and you had these wealthy rentiers who lived off their income, and that was it. And those arguments with the statistics have had a huge impact in the US. His solutions are a little bit more questionable, but he's touching a very, very raw nerve in the States, because people can see that they've been working hard and they haven't had any material improvement in their lives in the last few years. Whereas they see, they pick up the Wall Street Journal and they see the hedge fund managers earning, hundreds of millions, and it's like, wait a minute, what's going on?
And so the meritocracy is no longer working. Do you agree, Anmar ABD RABBO? The reason why it's that message resonates more in the United States than here is that here it's not quite as a disparity between the rich and poor at this point?
I didn't read the book, unfortunately, so I can't really comment on the content. But I wonder also if his accent doesn't do something about it, because I remember a few years ago in the US there was also a book about bringing up kids in France that was like something amazing and very good, and everybody was talking about it. And when you talk with French people, they don't have at all this idea. So I don't know. Maybe it's the exotic French thing.
Cintia CARDOSO?
Well, the book hasn't not been released in Brazil yet, but I think there is room that will make it be successful, especially if given into consideration that Brazil has a very, very high rate of inequality. So I think that the
and
issues
a growing
rate of inequality that hasn't been has not growing, has diminished over the years under Lula and under Dilma, but it's still a very unequal country. So I think that the book has everything to be successful in Brazil, and I think the French accent, as you pointed out, may be helpful as well.
But it's also it is unusual to see a French person topping the bestseller list in the United States.
Well, he's topping the bestseller list because he's had the most incredible endorsements. Some of the most well-known economists in the States have been writing very, very, very glowing reviews of, including Paul Krugman,
Yeah, that's right.
particularly in the New York Review of Books and the New York Times. You've had various Nobel Prize winners going on stage with him on his book tour saying, you know, he's really up to something and he's got new data. That's what's so interesting to the economists. He's come up with new data that they didn't have. And he's making a very important point with it. So that's really why it's doing so well. In France, you know, what he's saying is something that it's a very French point of view, that inequality is bad. And his solutions, which are primarily to impose wealth taxes, that already exists in France.
We know about those.
We
Yes.
know about those in France.
Yes.
France is one of the few countries that has a wealth tax.
Can I
And he
add
was
something?
advising Ségolène Royal, I think.
Gianni Carta, very briefly, because
Yes, I agree that it's a success in the United States. Obviously, I don't agree it is. But I just read, and I wrote it down, in the European Union and in the US, 70%, 10% of the people own 60% of all wealth. But the revenues are 25% to 35%. These are the elites. These are the aristocracy of Europe and the United States. So what he's suggesting is, well, let's tax these people who live on inheritance, and not so much the wage earners.
Not so much those who are actually
and the
working.
middle classes, like in Europe, like we are suffering.
And that's a
because
message that's
we're
resonating
paying for
there.
the hospitals, we're paying for the schools, we're paying for everything.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank Gianni Carta, Cintia CARDOSO. I also want to thank Anmar ABD RABBO and Peter GUMBEL. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.